Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Into the GSMC Basketball Podcast, right here in the GSMC Podcast Network. It is your host, back again, Brice Lewis, talking about everything basketball related, and we got some news today for the basketball. We have a big blockbuster trade that happened between the Houston Rockets and the Washington Wizards. We're going to get into as well during the show, the Lakers getting big commitments, extensions for their two stars. Then we're also going to get into some NBA news, maybe throw some college in there, depends if we can get to it. And also we're going to talk about the Clippers, as there is even more insight into the issues that they've had. We're going to talk about an interview Paul George had on All the Smoke. Go check that podcast out. Really good podcast, by the way, by Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson. We're going to talk about those comments. So, you know, we're going to get into some stuff today on the podcast, some juicy stuff, I would think, on the podcast today. Just like I said, I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Let me be part of your day once again here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast. And, you know what we do here, so we're going to get right into it. So, big blockbuster trade happened. So, we talked about this trade potentially being in the works about a month ago, I would say, between Russell Westbrook and John Wall. Well, apparently, Wednesday, the trade officially happened, or was it Tuesday? It may have actually been Tuesday when the trade actually went down, but Russell Westbrook is now a Washington Wizard, and John Wall is now a Houston Rocket. Big trade. Obviously, all the other compensation really wasn't that much. I believe Houston also got a draft pick in exchange for John Wall. So, but they basically, for the most part, swap point guards. And so I'm going to go and break down both sides of it from both teams' perspective on how this affects them moving forward. And we're going to get with the Wizards first before I get into Houston, because Houston has a lot more going on with that situation. So I'll talk about that at the end. But I'm going to go ahead and get into the Wizards right now. And, you know, Russell Westbrook has been labeled a guy who you can't win with. A guy that, you know, can be difficult to play with. But one thing about Russell is this: he's going to give you maximum effort. He's going to try. He's a guy who can get you triple doubles, clearly. A guy who can have big nights. And, you know, him and John Wall are very explosive players, but they don't play the same. John Wall isn't like, he could do what Russell Westbrook does, but that's not his game. John Wall is a slightly better shooter than Russell Westbrook. And so I think their games now in separate areas are going to maybe change the way they are perceived by a lot of people. And what I mean by that is this. So Russell's going to Washington. You got Bradley Beal there. Bradley Beal basically played on ball a lot since he was the only player who really could make a play for himself last year on the Wizards. Now you got Russ, who wants to have the ball in his hands and make plays. Now, we know Russ can get the ball to his teammates, so I expect Bradley Beal to get a lot of pull-up threes, pull-up J's this year, and still be able to continue success. I still think Bradley Beal can be and should be the highest point scorer on the team. I think because of the fact of his offensive game, I don't see why he wouldn't. I think they're going to run the offense through those two guys. They still have some young guys. The rookie from last year they drafted in the lottery, he made some strides. They brought back Bertans, a shooter. You know, Russ and Bradley Beal will be looking for him. You know, you look at this Washington team. I said before, if John Wall stayed, that I thought they could have been a playoff team, depending on how John Wall coming back, how he played, how he looked, how that relationship worked between him and Bradley Beal. I said, hey, this team could be a playoff team. Now with Russell, I don't feel like that's changed. I feel like they could still be, because one thing about Russell, we could say he doesn't win in the playoffs, but he has taken teams to playoffs before. He's taken OKC without Kevin Durant to the playoffs. yes, he had monstrous season and monstrous performances, which usually has to happen when you don't have maybe as much talent. But the difference in this situation, he got Bradley Beal. He has David Bertans. He has some young talent that he can work with and potentially get this team to that point where they can now make the playoffs. Because at the end of the day, I'm sure the Wizards are just looking, okay, can we become relevant? Russell Westbrook, when they allow fans back, will put fans in seats. People want to come see Russell Westbrook play. So they're going to get they're help increasing ticket sales with Russell Westbrook. Like I said, I expect them to be a competitive team. So when you go watch the product, it's not like you're watching a bad product. Like the thing about teams that are good but not championship teams is that if you want to go to a game like that, you know, hey, they could beat one of the best teams. It makes the games against the big teams worth it because it's like we might get a good game tonight. You know, because listen, I'm not saying they're going to beat these guys in the finals, but, I mean, they can beat a guy in the regular season. You know, any team can beat anybody in the regular season. It happens all the time. Where if you didn't have a good product, you, as the home team, you would be hoping whoever comes in there, like the Lakers or the Warriors, would be able to help you sell tickets. Like, when you're a bad team in the small market that maybe doesn't have the strongest fan base or fans coming out, you hope, when the Lakers come to town, I hope that helps us sell out because they're here. Right now, you can look at the Wizards and you can look at your team and say, well, we got Russell. And with just that alone, we'll be able to get a certain amount of people who wants to come see us play. And then anything else is just icing on the tape. So I expect the Wizards to still be in playoff contention this year. I expect the Wizards to be very competitive. I don't see any reason why they couldn't be competitive. They're really good. They're a team that they're looking to be great. You know, Scott Brooks is there as the head coach, and he obviously knows, hey, we got our second star. You know, the Wizards, I believe, before the restart was about the Wizards came back to the bubble. Yeah, because remember, a lot of the Wizard players did not come to the bubble because of injuries. Bradley Beal was hurt. Guys opting out. David Bertans did it for free agency purposes. So they didn't even have their full team in the bubble because they had a chance to be within 4 games of Orlando and challenge for the 8th spot, but they didn't have any players really. All their talent was gone. That's why I don't think they won a game in the bubble. Now you got Russell. I think that can give you 10, maybe 12 more wins, and in the Eastern Conference, that could be a playoff team. So that's why I think with this addition of Russell onto the team, I think this is going to help them. I think Russell's going to be able to get back to being Russell Westbrook this year. I think we're going to see the guy who's energetic, you know, a guy who definitely is going to, you know, highlight plays and triple doubles. And I think you're going to see that this year. But I think the big key is just to see how Bradley Beal and him mesh. Because Bradley Beal, remember, he's been used to being on ball all the time the last couple of years with John Wall being out. He hasn't really been off ball since John Wall. He obviously has had success playing off ball when he was playing with John Wall, so it's not like he can't play. But, you know, there's that adjustment period you have to make to going back to a certain style of play. So hopefully when training camp comes around, which should start probably within the next couple of days, for a lot of the teams, you're probably going to try to get that chemistry down and get them working together. We'll see how Bradley feels. The Wizards have remained very just straightforward. We're not trading Bradley Beal. He is one guy we want to keep. We want to see what happens. We'll see. Maybe if him and Russ aren't working, you would think they would want to trade Russ again, but it would be hard to keep trading a guy over and over again and getting decent compensation back. So maybe they could look to Bradley Beal. Maybe Bradley Beal might look to say, hey, this isn't working, so I might want to leave. So we'll have to see. We're gonna have to keep an eye on that. We'll have to keep monitoring that situation. But we'll have to see how everything works out. And then on Houston's side of things, you know, John Wall, apparently there was a report that came out after the trade saying that actually James Harden preferred to play with John Wall in 2020 over Russell Westbrook. So, in a way, you can make an argument that the Houston Rockets got a player that James actually wanted to play with. Because it's interesting how, you know, everybody talked about their relationship, how they played OKC together. And that's why they wanted to play together. But at the same time, now you're hearing, well, he actually preferred John Wall if John Wall was healthy. Listen, one thing about this is the game in personal life is different. Y'all could be friends, but at the same time, you could also know we aren't going to work together on the same team. You my boy, but we ain't going to work together on the same team. And maybe James knew, because let's say Russell is a guy who needs the ball a lot. Like, he needs that high top 3 usage rate to be Russell Westbrook. John Wall needs the ball, but he doesn't need the ball as much as Russell needs it. Though John has been used to always handling the ball since he's been the starting point guard for so long. So it'll be interesting to see the kind of offense that Stephen Silas does decide to run this year. Because they've usually done a lot of James Harden, ISO, he sets things up. Will he say, okay, we're going to divide it. James going to take it up some plays. John's going to take it up some plays. Keep it even between the two. Because they both can be very effective with the ball in their hands. You got two guys who can be effective with it. Like I said, John's not the best shooter, but trust me, one thing I always say about guys who rehab and try to get back, they've been working on their game. Because remember, they haven't been able to play. While you're rehabbing, you can work on your game. And so I think John's been trying to work on his J. I've seen the videos. A lot of the time when you watch John Wall recovery videos, you see him mainly taking jump shots. You don't really see him taking a bunch of dunks all the time and everything. Because he knows he needs that. And I'm sure James is going to look at it and say, hey. But like I said, with a new head coach and a new philosophy, we don't know how the Houston Rockets are going to run their team this year from an offensive perspective. We know James Harden's going to be the centerpiece, but how are they going to incorporate John Wall? How are they going to incorporate new guys like Christian Wood? How are they going to incorporate, guys like PJ? How are they going to incorporate guys like Eric? We got to see how he does it. Like, listen, people like playing for Stephen Silas. They say he's a bright young guy, and there's nothing wrong with him. They've said James has no issue with Stephen Silas whatsoever. But at the same time, we have to see how he incorporates that offense together. And like I said, with them getting John Wall, 2 years younger than Russell. Like I said, still a big contract, but 2 years younger than Russell. And etc. So, I believe John has about 2 years left on his deal. I think John has 2 years left, maybe 3, but he might have 2 years left on his deal. We'll have to see. Houston has remained committed to saying, James, if James wanted to still be traded, but we'll have to see. He thinks that James is going to want to come in, see what happens. You got John Wall, a guy that you would have preferred to play with in the first place. Basically, what the Houston Rockets are trying to do is try to say, hey, James, just calm down. We know that there's some changes, and you're a little unsure if these changes are going to put us where you want to be. But just give us a chance. Just work with what we have. Work with me. Work with the system. And let's see what happens. Because you can understand. Remember, one thing about this is that James Harden was not really consulted on a lot of the decisions that were made this offseason, which has been talked about may have rubbed him the wrong way. Because usually you always want to involve your star players in these decisions in some capacity, at least ask their opinion on the situation. So at least if they do make a decision, they can say, well, I gave my 2 cents. This is the decision they made, and whatever. But with that being, known, him not being consulted, then, certain moves being made that maybe he doesn't care for or like, we'll have to see how Houston really ends up at the end of this year. We'll have to see. Because, listen, Katie denied that they've been talking about trading and working together. We know a lot of players lie to the media because, obviously, if he blatantly says, yes, I've asked James to come ask for a trade, it just makes it seem like, okay, he's openly saying he's been trying to break up Houston. Where he's not going to say that. So he's just going to say, no, me and James haven't. But you don't think they've actually spoken about playing together? They have. So we'll have to see what happens with that situation. But I think this is a move that can benefit both parties. And we'll just have to see on the court later in the month how it actually turns out. But that's all the time we have here for this podcast. Not for the podcast, for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to get into some Laker talk as the Lakers get some big commitments. And we're also going to talk about Damian Lillard saying that it was easier to play in the bubble. We're going to discuss all that here and more on the podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment we discussed and broke down the blockbuster trade between the Wizards and the Rockets, as the Wizards get Russell Westbrook and the Houston Rockets get John Wall and a first-round pick, as now two different players going in two different directions. John Wall coming back from injury, Russell Westbrook looking to return to old Russell Westbrook, now having the opportunity to have fresh new starts and see what they can do with that. So we'll have to see how everything turns out. Wish the luck to both of those guys, and it'll be exciting. Like I said, adds just more storylines for this season to come forward with. But now we're going to get into some Laker talk, as the Lakers get two big commitments from the two star players. We're going to get into Anthony Davis first, as he signs a 5-year, $190 million contract with the Lakers. A lot of people were discussing, well, what is AD going to do? Is he going to sign a 1-1, a 2-1, or the long-term extension that the Lakers would have preferred? Well, we have our answer. He signed long-term. So he has made the commitment to the Lakers, even after LeBron leaves, for the most part, that he'll be there. And so that must be extremely exciting for Anthony Davis. You know, he's getting paid his money. You know, he's a guy who has worked very hard for everything. Really came of his own in the playoffs. Really, that Laker team was very Anthony Davis dependent, because you notice in the games that they lost, Anthony Davis usually did not have great games. But in every game they won, Anthony Davis was usually dominant. And that's why LeBron was so adamant that day, we need AD, we need to run it through AD, because AD can be the difference between us winning a championship and losing. Because if he plays as good as he can play with me on this team, we are probably one of the most unbeatable teams that there is in the NBA. That's why it was so important for AD to be consistent. And now he's getting paid like the top player that he is. And so, you know, is this move surprising at all that he made this long-term commitment? A lot of people were, because people were talking about, a 1-1 for Giannis and potentially all that. Where now, with him signing this deal, this basically kills any chance of Giannis coming to the Lakers. And I think AD looked at the situation and said to himself, realistically, I don't want to leave LA. Realistically, unless I'm willing to join a super team, there's really no other team that, to me, at the moment in time, would give me my best chance to win. Because usually when you play with LeBron, you make it to finals. Outside of last year, LeBron has made it to the finals every year he's played into the playoffs. Ever since, I believe, because he's made the playoffs ever since he started making the playoffs. The last year was the first year he ever missed it. Not this past season, but the year before that. And then the last, I believe, 8-9 times he's made it to the finals. So clearly, AD understands, hey, this is my best chance to win, get rings. You know, the team runs through me in terms of the success of me. I'm put in big spotlight. If I have big games, I will get credit. And people will sit here and say, hey, AD is that guy. And remember, some people are going to look at the fact LeBron is older too. He's going to need AD to be more of the guy. So if the Lakers keep winning, you have to say AD is a very big part of it, not just LeBron James. Because LeBron knows I'm getting older. I can't sit here and keep doing what I did when I was 20. AD got to be the guy who drives us there. And that's why I think he signed that extension, because he had the commitment. He has the best chance to win where he is. It's literally one of those situations where if you're happy, then why are you leaving? If you're happy where you are, then why would you leave? And I think that's what the situation, he was happy. He wanted to play with LeBron. He wanted to win a chip. He wanted to be recognized as one of the best players, and I think all of that was accomplished this year. And so for him, it's like, what's the point of doing a 1-1 for Giannis? Okay, so if Giannis doesn't sign with us, all I'm going to end up doing is signing a long-term deal next year either. Anyway, I'm just going to end up signing a long-term deal. So why not sign it now? It really isn't going to make a difference. And that's why he did it. Because, LeBron, he signed an extension. And I think also that played a part in why he signed. Because him and LeBron probably talked. Hey, AD, I'll be there for at least another 2-3 years. So, I'm be here. And AD was like, listen, if you going to be here for the next 2-3 years, then I might as well go ahead and commit at least 4. Because I believe after the 4th year, there's an opt-out. I believe. Either his 4th year he can opt out, or there's an opt-out after his 4th year. I have to check on that. But basically, he's basically like, I'll be able to play with LeBron for the next 3 years at least, while he's here. And so, for him, he feels like probably, hey, why would I want to leave playing with one of the greatest players, if not the greatest player of all times? There was just honestly, this made a lot of sense. Like I said, if they wanted to pursue a guy who, like a Giannis or another star player they thought they could get, I would understand signing those short-term deals. But at the same time, I think they understand, listen, as long as we're both healthy and we can play up to the level we can play at, we will always have a chance to win games. And we will always have a chance to win championships, regardless against teams. We are the favorites this year. And this will continue to be the case until another team could really rise up and show us that they're better. Because nobody has a duo like us. Nobody has a duo like LeBron and AD. There's very good duos, but there's nobody like LeBron and AD. So I think that's why AD decided to sign his contract. And then on LeBron's side, going into him, he signed a 2-year, $85 million extension. People were wondering, well, why would LeBron sign this? Everybody thought LeBron was going to go into free agency because he's the king of flexibility, the king of the 1-1. Yet he's giving this commitment to the Lakers. But I think LeBron's in the same situation. He's like, listen, I'm getting older. I may only play another 3, 4, 5 maybe years potentially. I have absolutely no reason to leave LA. People forget that LeBron actually made comments when he signed with the Lakers basically saying, this is probably the last place I'm going to be. The train's probably going to stop here. So it's not surprising to me that he signed this extension off those comments alone. He basically said, hey, there's no reason for me to feel like I have to leave. Unless we're losing and stuff, then why am I leaving? Like, really? Why would I leave if we winning? He says, I got Anthony Davis. We have a very good supporting cast. You can see Rob Pelinka is willing to do what it needs for us to be competitive. I'm in LA. My family's here. They love it here. I love it here. Why would I leave? I need to give him the 2-year commitment. And so, some people have been asking, is this LeBron kind of showing his hand on when he might retire? Because you hear that, he's probably not going to play anywhere else. But a lot of people have still brought up the rumor of, his son being draft eligible at the end of this deal. And we remember hearing that LeBron has said he would like to play with his son. So people wonder, is it possible that LeBron could still have that in mind where maybe he'll play one more year and say, I'll just play with my son? And basically be like, hey, wherever Bronny gets drafted to, I'll sign with. It is interesting to think that way because, a lot of people feel like LeBron James Jr. isn't that great, even though things can change. I believe he's just a sophomore in high school. I believe he's going in. I think he just completed his sophomore year actually of high school. So he's going into his junior year. Still has a chance, and you never know. Since he's LeBron James' son, he's already going to have that national clout from the high school recruiters. At the same time, he isn't a great player in high school or from any stretch of the imagination yet within the high school class. But he could, if he really develops, because remember, we've seen that picture of him working out with LeBron. Hey, Bronny, man, he didn't, he bulked up, man. He looked like a grown man. And if he can prove it on the court, You don't know where Bronny will be in 2-3 years when the draft comes. He picks a school. Regardless if he's the first pick, the second round pick, LeBron might still sit here and say, I'll play with you. I'll play with you. And you may see him rise up draft boards not because of his talent, but just because they know they're going to get LeBron. And if LeBron's still playing at a star quality level by that time, you darn right teams are going to tank to try to get him and LeBron James. So we'll have to see. At the end of this Laker deal, this could be the end of LeBron James in the NBA. We don't know. LeBron has not said that this is going to be probably it for me. He probably won't say anything like that. I know some people might start to ask more questions as the contract gets closer to that third year, but I don't think he'll give an indication. I think we're going to figure out more probably that last year he plays on that contract, and we'll know what LeBron James wants to do after that. So we're going to have to just stay tuned and see what happens with that. And then when we transition to this, Damian Lillard, was talking to Fat Joe, Mr. Big Joe, on a podcast, and he discussed playing in the bubble. And basically, Damian Lillard he says it was easier. He said the fact that, we didn't have to travel. We were practice somewhere. It was very consistent. No distractions. It was easier playing in the bubble. And, people, talked about how players were struggling in the bubble. People didn't want to be in the bubble. It was hard in the bubble. But I think there's two different issues. If you're talking about the mental, if you're talking about the social, yes, that might have affected players in the bubble. But if you talk about actual on-court business, I would feel like most players preferred it. Like, honestly, imagine if we didn't have a pandemic, but they were just like, hey, you could just play at your home arena for the whole year, practice at the same facility, don't have to travel anywhere, and then you can just play there. Recovery time is going to be faster. Players are going to be happier, not as tired. So for me, it's like that's pretty accurate. I believe Damian. I think a lot of players would agree with his sentiment. It's just, the whole isolation, not really being able to leave the area was probably difficult. That was probably, that mental side of it. What Paul George happened with Paul George being a little bit depressed. Like, that side of it might have been very difficult. But outside of that, in terms of the actual, on the court basketball business, I think a lot of players would have preferred that. And I think a lot of players were happy with it. That's why it's going to be interesting with this format they're going to try to play out, where they kind of do a baseball format where you play your series with teams. Like, if you play 2 home games against a team, you play them, and then you go to your next team. It's not, but then you're staying you're staying in the same city, like you're not doing as much traveling. So let's say, at best, you're going to have 2 road games with a team. So basically, maybe you'll play a team twice. So maybe not back to back, but you're basically going to do maybe for 3 days, play the same team twice. So you're going to be somewhere for 3 days. Then let's say you go a home game. You get 2 home games coming up. You're going to be back at home 4 or 5 days, maybe, depending on if you get a day, 2 days in between. 4 or 5, didn't travel. So you think about it, you're only traveling maybe twice a week, maybe, where twice a week, or maybe at best 3, where during the regular NBA stretch, unless you had a homestand or something, you're traveling maybe 4 or 5 times. Where you have a road game Monday, road game Tuesday, then a road game Thursday, then a road game Sunday. You've traveled 4 times in the week. And then you traveled 3 times within 4 days. Really 5 days. So, especially if you have that team that goes back home, then goes to the next place, like you're traveling a lot. And so it's harder sometimes with recovery and etc. And so I think with that being cut down, you might again see players that are fresher. You might see players that are in better shape. And I think with that being known, that might bolt well for the players. And maybe the players might sit here and say, hey, Adam, we may want this to stay as the format for the NBA season. So we'll have to see how it all turns out. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to get into some basketball news. So stay tuned for that right here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to Extreme Cage Fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we discussed the Lakers getting some commitments from their two biggest stars for at least, it seems like for at least another 3 years, as they have a chance to potentially go back-to-back this year, try to three-peat, maybe even quadruple-peat. We don't know, but they got some big commitments from Anthony Davis signing a 4-year, $190 million extension. And then also getting a commitment from LeBron James for 2 more years of $85 million. We also discussed Damian Lillard made his comments saying that it was actually easier for him to play in the bubble. We discussed why, the reasons why. It makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm sure a lot of players do actually feel that way when it comes to the basketball sense of things, because recovery time was better, didn't have to travel, you were able just to basically game, rest, practice, it was very consistent and everything of that sort. So we discussed that last segment. So now we're going to get into some NBA news. We're going to hit a couple of topics from around the league. So first, we're going to talk about Chris Paul. Apparently, Chris Paul, we heard about all the teams he could have went to this offseason. We knew that the Knicks were potentially a destination that you heard a lot of. Well, apparently, Chris Paul himself was not very fond of playing for the Knicks for a couple of reasons. First, he wanted to remain close to his son. Chris Paul has basically established his family in Los Angeles, and his son goes to school. I'm sure he doesn't want to uproot him. Like, when he went to OKC, his family was still in Los Angeles. People don't know that. They were still in Los Angeles. And he wanted to be closer to his son. Where it's really different being in Oklahoma trying to fly to California and fly back than being in Arizona, which is right next to California. And basically, that was his first reason. Second, he also felt like the appeal of playing at Madison Square Garden was not there because of the fact with COVID and the fans and everything. Basically, if he wasn't going to play in front of packed Madison Square Garden fans, he did not see the same reasoning. He didn't see the same enthusiasm. He didn't see the same, basically the same outlook on playing for them. Because he was like, I don't know about all that. The incentive isn't that great. And so, with the Suns, he's able to accomplish being closer to his son, being probably on a more competitive team than he would have been in New York. And then on top of that, listen, it's Phoenix. We never talk about Phoenix fans, even though every arena, I always say this about every arena in NBA, every arena can be great. Every arena can be great, depending on the team and, the season. I'm sure if the Milwaukee Bucks, we think Milwaukee, Pacers, they have great crowds when the team is good. And maybe they feel like they have a chance. But Phoenix is known for their fan base. He probably looks at listen, they're a good enough crowd. Because like I said, the Knicks are in a position where since they're not a good team, they have to have different things like the Madison Square Garden appeal and other things to help contribute to why players would come there and play. Because it's not like we're a good team with a great organization, with a good front office, and we are one of the most smartest basketball decisions you can make to play here. Because technically that would be a bad basketball decision for Chris Paul if he went there. If anything, he said, if I'm going to sit here and go here, I need to make sure this is going to be available to me, and it's not. So I'm not going to go be somewhere that I may not be fully happy with and play. Which is completely understandable. Completely understandable. And I get why Chris Paul made that decision. But then we have to go back to some Houston news. Because apparently, James Harden requested a trade, and he's been open about a trade to the Nets. And basically, the report is that the Rockets felt like him trying to force a trade was very, and I quote, improper. They didn't like the fact that he was trying to basically say, oh yeah, by the way, I want out of here, get me out of here. They weren't happy about that. And so basically, his first name is, I believe, Farbad. I don't know how to say his last name, so I'm not going to say it. His Twitter @ is Farbad _E, if you want to look at the tweet. He works for Sports Illustrated, and he said this about that. He said from his sources, Houston felt the way Harden attempted to force a trade to Brooklyn was improper. Houston maintains they have the leverage. Harden still wants to play in Brooklyn, and it may take a while. It appears Harden wants to pull a clutch / Anthony Davis moves, but he doesn't have an agent. So, pretty much, for me, what you're hearing right now is that clearly they felt as like, hey, he was trying to pull Anthony Davis where just out of the blue, hey, I want to go here. I want to play for them. I want to play with him. And they were like, no. And I think that's why, and I told y'all earlier, I really think they're trying to get him to come to the team, just give it a chance, just see about everything, and just like, hey, let's see about it. Because Houston truly believes they have leverage, because they feel like we don't have to do anything. We don't have to make any moves. We don't have to trade you. We can keep you here. Like you heard, they said they're willing to get uncomfortable. And so the thing about it that's interesting, I think, with them now getting John Wall, John, they said reportedly he was shocked by the trade. He was not expecting to be traded. Like I said, Bradley Beal was shocked by it as well. They really thought, Bradley Beal and John Wall really thought they were going to play at least one more year together. And then boom, they moved John. But, with John there, it would be kind of wild for him to be there, and then James is in there. Because think about the move we've been talking about them making with the Nets, including Spencer Dinwiddie, Chris LeVert, and them. Well, you got John now. So you bring in Spencer Dinwiddie, you Chris LeVert, let's say you bring in Jared Allen. Like I said, I don't know if Joe Harris could be in there. Maybe some picks. I mean, overall, the Houston team doesn't look like a bad team. It doesn't. But, first he was blindsided by moving. Then he's not playing with James. It's just like, he's just kind of like, this is a very weird year for me. Coming back from, an injury that I haven't played basically 2 years on. I think John would feel like he maybe is in a weird spot a little bit. He's in a weird place, potentially. Which, he kind of would be in that situation. So, I'm sure John's trying to figure out what's going on. Are we going to have James or not? Like I said, Stephen Salas is saying, listen, we're going to give James some time, and we're going to hope he gives us a chance. But we'll have to see. And I'm sure if I'm Stephen Salas, you're giving him space, but you're going to eventually, when the season gets closer, you're going to have to kind of, hey, James, can we talk? Can you give this a shot? But listen, in this article, I wasn't aware of this. I didn't know James Harden didn't have an agent, which would be surprising because I would think every agent in the world would want James Harden as a client, but maybe he doesn't feel like he needs one. Because remember, Anthony Davis, when he did force his way out of New Orleans, he was a Clutch Sports, which Clutch Sports is now looked at as an agency that has power within the league because of LeBron. So when somebody from Clutch Sports wants something, most teams are willing or more have to at least provide or, go with whatever they want. Because they understand how powerful that agency is. Where James, he doesn't have that backing. It's just James. And so they feel like, well, it's just James. So we're going to keep you. So, it'll be interesting to see, what happens. Like I said, Houston wasn't clearly happy about him wanting out. And we'll have to see if James comes around. And then speaking about more with the Wizards in Houston, apparently, coming from the Wizards' point of view, teams that were calling about John Wall, and in the trade talks that were discussed, teams were very open about wanting multiple draft picks. Because basically, teams were saying, hey, listen, if we take on John Wall, he hasn't played in 2 years. We don't know what type of physical basketball shape he's in. We don't know where he's at with his conditioning. We don't know if he's a broken down player at this point and he might continue to get hurt. So if we take him on, y'all going to have to give up some of your draft picks for the next few years so at least we can protect ourselves just in case he gets hurt again. So clearly I would think the Wizards in that situation, because think about it, with Houston, all they gave was a first round pick. But other teams demanded multiple. So clearly, which I can understand why teams feel that way. Like, listen, we don't know if this guy can stay healthy. We don't want to get a guy who can't stay healthy and have nothing else. At least if he gets hurt, hey, we got draft picks. We can move off of him. We have some capital to still build off of with this trade. Teams are like, we're not going to set ourselves up for absolute failure. And so that's why they said, hey, Washington, if you really want him out that bad, if you give us some firsts with John, we'll take him off your hands. And remember, the teams that asked for this were the ones with mild interest, not even great interest. There's just teams that are like, oh, we're going to explore it. We're going to see about it. We're going to see if maybe it's something we can look into. So definitely understandable from that point. But on the not on Cleveland side, but on the Houston side of things, Cleveland actually inquired about Russell Westbrook. And also, the Warriors apparently acquired about James Harden, potentially. So clearly, teams have been contacting about them and saying, hey, so what is it looking like with them? What is it possible? Now, the Warriors, that's understandable for James. Listen, you just lost Clay. Adding a guy like James would be big time for them. But again, I don't think there's anything they can really give them that way. Literally, to get James, they'd probably have to give up. They probably would have to trade again Kelly Oubre, trade Andrew Wiggins, probably also have to give up, I don't know how valuable Draymond Green is to a team. Probably have to give up James Wiseman. You probably have to give up 3 guys in your starting lineup. You have to give up whatever picks you have. And then maybe a couple other players to even have a chance for the Houston to give you James. Because they sit here and say, we're going to give you the James, Steph Curry. Y'all got to give us the rest of your starting lineup and a couple of bench players and some picks. If we're going to give you James to play with Steph. So, clearly, I'm sure the Warriors said, let's just see if it's something they would do. The Warriors and them really never gained any traction. So, probably not. I think the Warriors just, they're doing their due diligence. Hey, we lost Clay. Is there any way we could maybe get something going with this? Or maybe you could be interested in giving us James. I'm sure Houston was like, not really. Plus, we're trying to keep him. So, because the Warriors are always a team looking to always try to get a step ahead. Always try to stay a step ahead of the NBA if they can. And so, they're just like, hey, let's give it a shot. So, it's interesting, knowing some teams were still interested in these guys and trying to see what's going to happen. So, it'll be interesting to see what happens. It goes on. So we'll have to see if anything else comes out about potential teams that were interested in those players. Well, that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to have a discussion of the Clippers again, as even more details and news came out about what happened this past year with the Clippers, and I will give my thoughts next right here on the podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we discussed multiple things. We discussed the Knicks and CP3, as CP3 was not very fond of joining the Knicks, feeling like it's moving too far away from the sun, and the appeal of Madison Square Garden isn't there because of Kobe. So clearly, with no fans, who cares to play Madison Square Garden, I guess. We also discussed other things. Talked about Houston not liking the way James Harden tried to force a trade, tried to pull Anthony Davis. But they maintain they have leverage, and Harden doesn't have an agency backing him up. So we discussed that as well last segment. And also certain teams were calling about certain players. Warriors called about Harden, Cavs called about Westbrook. Teams called the whistles about John Wall, wanting multiple picks with John Wall because of his injury history. And we discussed all that last segment. Before we get into this one, I'd like to remind you guys, please don't forget to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_basketball. That is GSMC_basketball. So we can interact, talk about all things basketball with you guys, have fun. You know, we'd love to hear from you guys. You know, we'll interact here at GSMC, so you know how we do here. But, so, now we're going to get to the Clippers. The Clippers. So, we have even more details about the arrangements that they were given this past season and why that led to a lack of buy-in and issues between Clippers and basically the Stars. So, apparently, according to The Athletic, an article that was written on there, apparently there were some perks that Kawhi and Paul George got. First, Kawhi was, and we've heard this, was given the ability to live in San Diego, which is a little bit further from LA. And then, you know, making that ride from San Diego to LA, if you've ever done it, I've never done it, but I've heard there's a lot of traffic. So it could take you 45, 30 minutes to an hour and a half, 2 hours. And so that was one reason why sometimes they were late on team flights, because Kawhi was coming further away than everybody else. Also, they had their own personal security guards. So this isn't really as too much of a big deal because, you know, players, I think, do hire sometimes their own entourage security sometimes. Maybe just, you know, it was just kind of like, maybe they had extra security or personal for them security than just team security. Also, they were allowed to not have to talk to the media literally 45 minutes before the game. So literally their teammates had to be basically the voices of the Clippers because they were the ones having to talk to the media because they got the chance to talk to them literally at the last minute. Also, they said they were able to dictate practice schedules. So they picked and choose when practice would happen. They were able to sit here and say, we ain't practicing today, or we don't want to practice today. We heard originally that they would sit out of practice. Now we're learning that they actually dictated when they would practice. So I'm sure teammates probably felt like, well, we're busting our butts and you're not. Like, you know, I'm sure a lot of guys were sitting there and was just like, what? Also, they were also able to have control over personal playing time. They basically could decide when they would leave the game and when they would go into the game and how long they would play. And a lot of players were rubbed the wrong way. Now we're going to get into Paul George first since he's the big topic here. A lot of people, because we got to get to comments he made and etc. But I'll talk about this. Another report came out saying that a lot of reason why the Clippers were other player Clippers were very, just like on Paul George was because of his playoff success. Literally, they're basically like, what have you done? why is it that because apparently the report is that yes, Kawhi got a lot of treatment that bothered people, but it was met with a higher level of acceptance because he had just won a championship. Paul George has not won anything in his life. He has struggled in many playoff series. We all remember what happened in Utah, where he got done up by Joe Ingles and was basically just non-existent. And I think players sat here and said, you know, it's crazy how you're getting the same perks as Kawhi, but you haven't done half of what he's done. And yet, it felt like in a lot of reports that Paul George was sometimes the most vocal in the locker room out of the two, because we know Kawhi is a very quiet person. And that's why a lot of players would just look at him and be like, okay. Because it's just like, I mean, you haven't done anything that we haven't done. Patrick Beverley, Lou Williams, we haven't done anything that you haven't done. We've made the playoffs. We've been eliminated in the second round. What have you done that makes you the superior? Oh, because you're considered a better player than us? We played with players better than us all the time, but they at least respected us and still did the same things we did. What makes you special? And then Paul George went on the All the Smoke podcast with Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson and basically said that the reason why they blew a 3-1 lead was first because they didn't make any adjustments. He said there were no adjustments that were going to be made, and Doc Rivers didn't use him correctly. This faced some backlash. Some people had some backlash because they felt like, well, first, here's something that was actually funny. Paul George said that one thing that he felt like Doc was trying to do with him was use him more as a Ray Allen type, where he's like, you kind of have to use me in post-ups. You have to use me in pick and roll and stuff like that. But did you know that Paul George actually had his highest percentage of pick and roll usage this past year? I believe it was at 31%. So clearly, Doc Rivers actually used you more in the pick and roll than you've ever been used in your career. So it was very interesting to me that he would make a comment basically saying, well, Doc didn't use me correctly. And I think the biggest issue I think a lot of people have with these comments is that Paul George, ever since the playoffs ended, has not taken any responsibility for what happened. He has blamed everybody else for why they lost. He said, it's not me, it's Doc. It's not me, it's the other players. It's not me. But, Paul, nobody's making you brick a side of open three on the side of the back of the board. That's you. And the fact that you're not taking... If he came out and said, okay, you know, there were some things that weren't working, there were some things I didn't really agree with, but I also didn't do my part, I also didn't play well myself, I could have did better, then it would have been like, okay, we get it. Because he said there were some things he wasn't, happy about, which he's expressed, but then he took responsibility for his part, which would have been like, okay, we get you. But the fact that you never did that, and it was just like, well, they didn't use me correctly, to me, it kind of just makes it seem like he's trying to avoid the blame. And like I said, Paul George is a guy to me. Listen, out of the two stars, the Clippers, I'm sure everybody else in the league would probably rather, they probably be like, Kawhi's our priority next year. If we're keeping y'all, we're keeping Kawhi. Kawhi's who we want. Paul, no, not gonna lie to you, man. We might have to just let you walk. Because if we're getting playoff performances like that, and you out here blaming everybody else and just all that, it's just, what? That's why I think it's going to be interesting to see what Ty Lue does. Because I'm sure they're going to still have perks. That's not going away. But it's the way that Ty Lue manages these perks. Because, everybody talks about that time in Cleveland when LeBron was trying to basically talk over Ty Lue, and then he was like, LeBron, like shut up, I got this. And Doc never did that with his stars last year. And so I think a lot of people are intrigued by, well, is Ty Lue going to do that with them and say, listen, Paul, Kawhi, we need y'all in there now. We need y'all practicing now. Like, listen, y'all can take other days off of practice. We can discuss that later. But today, maybe the Clippers came off a bad game. You need to practice with them. Maybe is how Ty Lue has to manage it, to let him know, like, listen, if we doing good, you playing well, we playing well, you know what, you want to take a day off practice? Sure, not a problem. But if we're struggling, chemistry isn't good, you're practicing, you're playing, you're coming out when I say you're coming out. I mean, it'll be interesting. Are they going to still allow Kawhi to stay in San Diego? I don't know. Maybe Ty Lue might adjust the team flights to make sure he can make it on time. It's going to be interesting to see because I don't think you can just say, let's do the exact same thing we did last year with them and think no other players might have an issue. Even JaMychal Green was kind of like, I didn't really like it. And we know Patrick Beverley and Lou Williams weren't the biggest fans of it. Montrez was vocal about it. That's why he's not there anymore. People think Marcus Morris potentially wasn't happy about it, but he literally is just keeping his mouth shut. It makes you wonder, did every other Clipper player have an issue with it? I mean, that's kind of the big thing here. So, Paul George to me is on thin ice. Paul George, if you want to finally, just really shut people up, man, regular season, if you have a great regular season, fantastic. Playoffs, you guys show up. And you guys show up in big games. Because if you don't, these last 2 years are going to be remembered for you choking in the playoffs, being pandemic P, not playoff P, and then you blaming others and alienating your teammates and making people not want to play on the Clippers anymore because of the status that you think you have. Like Paul George has a chance that his 2-year run with the Clippers, if he leaves next year, to not be a great 2-year run and be looked at as he caused more harm than he caused any type of positivity. So he has to be careful with that. And then on Kawhi's fact, like they said, players had issues with it too. Clearly, I could understand. You're on the flight, you're waiting to go, and then you're having to wait because Kawhi ain't here yet, and you're just kind of like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're trying to get there, you're trying to get, maybe get to the hotel, trying to rest, but you gotta wait because Kawhi ain't there. I can understand why players would clearly have an issue with what Kawhi got. Like I said with Paul, but like I said, there was a high level of acceptance because, Kawhi did win a championship. He's won 2. He is 2 times in the Finals MVP. He has backed up a lot of the play he's had. It's not like he's sat here and he hasn't done anything doing it. Again, we may not personally agree with what he gets sometimes, but I mean, we get why he's getting it. It's almost like I don't particularly care for it, but I understand. Where Paul George is like, I don't know why he's getting it, and I don't understand. So, but here's the thing, too, we have to look at in the situation with the Clippers. You don't think other star players were getting treatments like, you don't think LeBron is getting star treatment? The thing is that LeBron James and his leading ability and in the way he is as a player and as a leader, players are like, you know what, LeBron's the GOAT, LeBron's the best player in the game, you know what, he deserves all that. But he also LeBron does make an effort to try to reach out to teammates, have relationships, try to be there for them, be vocal leaders for them. And so as a player, it's like, okay, I think LeBron got my back here. I think LeBron's on my side. So even though, he's getting these perks, he's not making it seem like, hey, I'm above all y'all. Y'all can just get away from me, and y'all can just do what y'all gonna do. I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do. I mean, Anthony Davis and him basically in the bubble said, shoot around. That's different. Shoot around, the chemistry was already established. The Clippers didn't have the chemistry, and they were out here talking about, we ain't want to practice today, but we ain't got no chemistry, though. Like, that makes no sense to me. That way they weren't using their minds when they made that decision. And so, listen, the Clippers have had a lot of issues. Players have been rubbed the wrong way, and there's just so much that could happen, so much that could change. So, we'll have to see how it all shakes out this season with the Clippers. They're going to be a team that people are going to watch for as, we'll have to see if they make any more changes to the roster, and we'll have to see where they end up at the end of the season. But that's all the time we have here for this podcast. Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Let me be part of your day. Like I said, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_basketball. Also, don't forget to listen to our other amazing podcasts here at the GSMC Podcast Network. This is your host, Brice Lewis, saying have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.